Welcome everyone. I am Councillor Lynn Stagg, Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation. Please be assured that we have put appropriate cleansing and social distancing measures in place to ensure that this meeting is undertaken in a COVID-secure manner. Limited public seating has been made available and this has been allocated in such a way that all present are aware of the COVID-secure protocols in place. This meeting is also being webcast to allow the public to attend remotely if they so wish. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. Can I ask members to remain seated throughout the duration of the meeting? Housekeeping, safety information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. Live web streaming. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that the meeting will be live streamed. Everyone speaking will be on camera. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please can everyone use their microphones and remember to switch them off when they have finished. Introductions. I'll go around. I'll start with Councillor Heaney.
I'm Councillor Graham Heaney. I'm the Labour Group spokesperson on traffic and transportation.
Thank you. Councillor Bosher.
Councillor Simon Bosher. I'm the Conservative spokesman for traffic and transportation.
Councillor Corkery.
Good afternoon, everyone. Cal Corkery, one of the councillors for Charles Dickens Ward.
Nikki.
I'm Nikki Musson, and I'm Senior Transport Planner within the parking team. And can I just make a small apology? I have asthma and a postnasal drip, so I often have to clear my throat. But I've done a COVID test and it's negative, so that's why you'll hear me clear my throat a lot. Thanks.
We believe you, Nikki. Thank you. Kevin.
Good afternoon. I'm Kevin McKee. I'm the parking team manager for Portsmouth City Council.
Wayne.
Hello, I'm Wayne Layton. I'm a finance manager here at Portsmouth City Council.
Jane.
Jane Didino, Local Democracy Officer.
Deputies, would you like to introduce yourselves now or wait until you do your deputation?
When I make the deputation.
Okay, is that right with you? Okay, thank you. Right. Have we got any apologies for absence, Jane?
None, Chair.
Thank you. Declaration of members' interest. Councillor Heaney, Councillor Bosher, do you have any interest whatsoever relating to this, obviously?
No interest to declare, no.
Lovely, thank you. In that case, we go on to the item number 3 on the agenda, which is Residence Parking Programme of Consultation, Reprioritisation. Kevin, you're presenting this. I think this is your show today, isn't it? You're presenting everything, I think.
That's right, yeah. So
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry if you get sick of my voice. It's a bit dry. But yeah, the item 3 is a report dealing with the prioritisation of consultations on residence parking schemes. We're coming to the end of the earlier programme of consultation, and that was a rolling programme which dealt with one area and then consulted the next area in case there was displacement. That has worked well, but it did mean that there was a concentration on one area of the city, and I think there were concerns that by looking at one area of the city we weren't looking at giving other areas a chance to be consulted. So for this report, what we've looked at doing is identifying areas where there's unlikely to be significant displacement and taken them out of the programme to be prioritised first, and then reintroduce a rolling programme for the other areas after that. In both those cases, we've prioritised the areas to be consulted according to a scoring matrix. We've made a couple of changes to that scoring matrix. Rather than relying on the number of people coming forward as a basis for scoring. We've changed it to the percentage of people coming forward, or households coming forward, because that is fairer for the smaller. We feel that's fairer for the smaller areas, and we've also changed the scoring where areas have less than 50% of the properties with off-street parking. We've increased the score for that because that's quite a key indicator that puts parking pressure on the street. Appendix 1 of the report shows the requests that we've received for residence parking zones. Table 1 in the report shows how we've split the zones into those that we feel are unlikely to cause significant displacement and the others that we think will require a rolling programme. And Table 2 shows an outline programme for consultation for the first set of zones. That table assumes that every area we consult does want it, and we then move on to a formal consultation. Of course, that may not be the case, and in which, if that is the case, if some of the zones don't want respond negatively to the informal consultation, then obviously that programme will condense because we won't have to move on to the formal consultation. And so the recommendations are for the progress made since August 2020 and the conclusions of the rolling programme is noted, and that the rolling programme of consultation has been completed. B, that the programme set out in Table 1, page 4 is agreed, meaning that the consultation recommences with the 5, what we're calling self-contained areas identified, and that once work in the 5 self-contained areas in Table 1 is complete, the remaining 4 areas of the programme are progressed in a rolling element, again developed to mitigate any displaced parking impact. And once work described in C above is complete, the review of existing parking zones recommences to ensure optimal operation of for permit holders, with a new programme developed based on demand from residents.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Now, I believe there's one written deputation, is that right, Jane, and one in person. So is it one of you two gentlemen who are... Is it you, Carl?
It is, yeah.
I'm sorry. I just assumed it was somebody from the public. Would you like to do your deputation now? And then
I can
Jane,
do, yeah.
Will you follow on with the written ones? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Stagg. I think this is probably the first time I've ever come to a meeting specifically to talk about parking. With a little bit of luck, it'll be the last time for a little while.
Shouldn't think so. it's a
well, luckily in Charles Dickens, you see, parking doesn't tend to be such a massive issue because 63% of households don't own a car, which is quite an interesting little fact I like to wheel out from time to time. But this particular area that I wanted to talk about is an area where residents have been in touch with me with concerns about parking. So I wanted to just come along just to ask a few questions about that. It is around the Railway View area, which is kind of just adjacent to the city centre. And apologies also for not perhaps getting the opportunity to have these discussions beforehand. I was away last week. Ordinarily I might have picked some of these up informally before the meeting, but I only picked up my emails yesterday, so I thought I'd come along and have the discussion in person. The question I basically have is how the classification of Railway View and the prioritisation has changed from the last report that was published, because I think in the last report it was top, in this report it's dropped down to bottom. In that intervening period I've had people contact me to complain about parking, and I was able to kind of have discussions with officers and also look at the report and reassure them, well actually you're top, so in theory you should be coming up next. So I just really wanted to have an understanding of how that's changed, and also just pick up a couple of specifics about the scoring matrix, again by way of question. And I appreciate these are potentially quite technical questions, so people may or may not be able to answer it on the spot, but if not, I'm more than happy to take the answers kind of at a later date. So just with regards to not being awarded any points for having more than 50% of properties with no access to off-street parking, I just wanted to query if that was correct. It may be, but I would be surprised because a significant portion of properties in that area are flats, which by definition don't have their own off-street parking. And then the similar question also applies to whether properties have got a frontage width of under 5 metres. Now, obviously, those would then impact potentially on the scoring. I appreciate it's perhaps only a difference of 3 months in terms of whether it happens top or kind of 4th or 5th, but that is potentially 3 months difference to those residents of inconvenience with their parking or not. So as I say, it's kind of not a massive issue in the grand scheme of things, but it is an issue I've been lobbied about, so I wanted to just come along and kind of make those representations and also ask those questions so that I've got that information to then feed back to the residents who've been in touch.
Well, before we go on to there's only one written deputation, isn't there? Perhaps Kevin can answer some of those questions for you while you're here.
I was going to refer to Nikki.
Nikki is the guru, by the way. She's of all residence parking zones.
Okay, I don't have a copy of the previous programme with me, so I can't do a comparison. So what we've got here, I wasn't sure which one you're talking about, but if
it's JH, isn't it?
Yeah.
JH.
Because obviously JG and JH are both in your ward. So JH didn't score for not 50% of properties not having access to street parking. Is that one of your questions? Yeah. There's a lot of housing parking around there. So I can't remember all the names. Off Canal Walk, where you've got those houses, they've got the driveways.
Can you speak a little bit louder into the microphone so that people who are watching from home?
It's because I'm trying to talk to Councillor Corcoran.
Yes, I know, it's difficult.
So the roads off Canal Walk, which is paying display, have got all their front gardens are driveways, so that counts for quite a lot of the properties around there. There's a few housing-owned parking areas, which is for those properties on Railway View. I don't know if I think there's actually a couple of private car parks. So if you add it up, the types of properties, they haven't scored anything because there's quite a lot of off-street parking there. But if you did add 2 points there, it would still only take it to 9, so it would be in the same position. Did you ask about Froddington, about JG?
No.
No, I think my other question was about, so that would be 3 points, and then my other question was about the width properties. But bearing in mind that a lot of the properties there are flats, but I appreciate there are some houses as well.
I think what that really means is where we've got areas, really large areas of the city, they've got narrow terraced housing, they tend to take priority because they are under 5 metres. So, and a lot of the flats, as you say, they've got access to car parks, private parking. We don't have a huge demand from those areas over the years, but they are in the programme because there has been demand. And then we obviously survey them and see if they're interested in permit parking.
Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah.
You asked why they changed the order on the programme, So I think, as Kevin explained, we changed the criteria slightly, hopefully improved it, but it has then affected some of the scores. So really that goes back to the number of requests and the percentage from the areas now. So they've scored slightly lower on that. So you've got 1 point for requests from 5% of the properties, which isn't very high. So that's why they've moved down. But what we're finding was if you got a street of 20 properties and they had 5 requests, that's quite a high proportion. Whereas if you've got an area of 200 properties and 5 requests, it doesn't really, represent a majority. So that's why it's changed slightly. But as you say, we're due to do the survey in the next 3 months because it starts in October. So because the timescales here start in July because we've been working, through, so July, September, which is this month. We're obviously informally surveying if this is approved to an area of Hilsey and one in Nelson, and then October, which is only next month, or November. It might be December, but we'll try and press on. But certainly by the end of this year, they'll be surveyed.
Well, it's next month anyway, isn't it, October, so... Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for those answers, yeah, and that gives me the kind of information to feed back to the residents that have been in touch. I guess all I'd take the opportunity to do at this stage, Councillor Stagg, is just to ask for kind of assurance that this will happen and it's not going to come to another report further down the line and again have been pushed back.
Well, it depends on whether I say yes to this today. If I say yes, it's going to definitely go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm open to bribery and corruption. Jane? Yes, yes.
Okay, Chair, we have a written deputation from Councillor Lee Hunt. Okay, so it's Nelson Ward councillors have been going door to door with a short survey to get a better feel for what people want. From residents we found in at home there was considerable interest in a residents' parking scheme. Altogether, along the 3 streets we've surveyed today, only 17 residents didn't want to take part in our informal survey. We knocked on all homes in Jervis, Widley and Walden roads. Out of 91 homes where we found householders in 55 informed us that they were in favour of a residents' parking scheme. 11 said they were against, 8 didn't mind either way, and 17 did not want to take part. A big majority wished to see an evening scheme and believe a scheme will help with parking in the area. All 3 ward councillors wish to see the council survey this area soonest and trust this information is helpful.
Thank you. Some of the background to this, I know Kevin has gone through it, but I was very conscious that there were some areas in the city that had asked for residents parking a long time ago, and because of the rollout programme, because of displacement, that hadn't taken place. So I was very keen to have some of those areas addressed now, and there are others as well, which will be coming up later on. Councillor Bershaw, have you got any questions?
Quite a few, Councillor Stagg. Apologies for that. I guess my first question goes back to the 2019 report, and there were an awful lot of areas to be resurveyed, if you remember. And at that time, when I asked what was the impact on the new programme on those, I was assured that it wouldn't have an impact. Now, COVID aside, we've now got 3 or 4 new schemes coming in, and I'd like to know, does that further push back the expectations of those residents in places like Mulberry Lane who've been wanting a resurvey? I know Mulberry's on here, but there are some areas around the hospital and up in the north of the city that have been waiting for a resurvey to tweak their zones, particularly in the north of the city. Are they going to have to wait even longer? Because some of these have been waiting for that resurvey since 2015.
Kevin, have you got an answer for that? Or Nikki?
Do you mean reviewing existing parking zones that people have already got?
Yes.
Zones in place, yeah. So that comes down to, I think, recommendation D. So it's acknowledged that we still intend to review the existing parking zones. So that they, I think it says, ensure their optimal operation for permit holders with a new programme developed. But this programme at the moment deals with areas that don't have permit parking. So yes, you're right, it will still be a while before we can resurvey areas that have already got permit parking.
Thanks, Nikki. Can I ask then that back in 2019, they featured on this programme, and again, COVID aside, because that's put a dent in the timelines of the programme, and I fully accept that. But surely it's not beyond the wit that we could actually give these areas that have been featuring since 2019, and some even earlier than that, the opportunity to at least have an idea of which century they're going to have their surveys done in. And I might be being a bit flippant, but some of these people that have been asking have actually passed away now, and it's not happened in their lifetime. And I think it's extremely disappointing they seem to be being let down on that. And I might suggest that actually, and I appreciate this report is about new RPZs, but it has an inherent impact on those people that have been waiting since 2019, and at the very least, you should have something come back to your cabinet meeting that can actually give these people a degree of sight of when it is likely to happen, rather than just keep bumping them back of the queue and the back of the queue, which seems to be what's happening at this precise moment in time.
Kevin, we do have a forward plan, don't we? I mean, I don't think it's in tabs of stone at the moment, but I think...
I think the difficulty with the consultation plan and putting it too far in advance is it depends on how many areas say yes, because if we do an informal consultation and the area says no, then we'll move on to the next one. And particularly with the rolling programme, it depends how far out that needs to go before we deal with the displacement. So they are still, it's still in the recommendation that we do that, but it's not really that feasible to say exactly when. If a lot of the areas we consult turn out not to want a new RPZ, then we can move more quickly onto the areas which currently do have an RPZ but need a review.
I hear what Kevin's saying. It's the point that I'm making is that all this featured on the 2019 report. There was a long list of them, when they'd been asking for and what had been going on since. Effectively, from their perception, when they look at this, which is a reprioritisation of that report, so this is an update on that, they've dropped off it completely. To me, it's sending out completely the wrong message, and something needs to be done to make sure that these people know that something's going to be happening. At this moment in time, we seem to be bumping along and extending bits in the south of the city, and people in the north, and there is a north-south divide on this, are being bumped out of it. And part of the other thing that came out of that was an assurance that they would get seen to quite quickly, because if you remember, the Baffins RPZ, which was going to have a knock-on across Copner, didn't go ahead, so the plan for Copner and across the middle of the city didn't happen, which freed up an awful lot of potential space. These people have dropped off that report, and I think it's unfair on them that they should have dropped off it, and something needs to be brought back so that it can be addressed. At least they have a degree of visibility, of an optimism that they are likely to be resurveyed. Moving on, and I'm sort of with Cal to a certain degree, and I don't want you to take this the wrong way, Cal. I've been looking at the scoring matrix that seems to have been rejigged, and I can't remember when the report came forward that said it was rejigged. I must have missed that one. But out of curiosity, on table 1, you've got 5 there that you're planning to do, 12, 11, 11, 10 and 7 with Railway Triangle, which has dropped from 11 previously. But you've got GC, the Shearer one, at 11. Why is Railway Triangle, in theory on those numbers, ahead of Shearer Road, is my first question. And secondly, the one that interests me to a certain degree is the larger block halfway down, area located within 500 metres of a major trip generator, shopping centre, da-di-da-di-da. You've got the Doyle Avenue one there at 6, and Railway Triangle there at 4. Just somebody explain to me what the difference between the 6 and the 4 is on that scoring matrix as well, if that's at all possible.
Nikki?
Okay, what we'd really need here is a map with a 500 metre radius, and I could point out all the amenities. But Doyle Court is within that distance of the Mountbatten Centre and the High Street and businesses and that sort of thing. So what we've done is gone through very carefully, pinpointed the middle of the zone, drawn a 500 metre radius and identified all the amenities that have scored points. And what was...
So, because I looked at that and I was just sort of trying to think where, location of Doyle Court, and it's and obviously the higher the points there is determined by how close it is to a major facility. So Doyle Court, yes, you're right, it's the Mountbatten Centre, there's schools quite close by, etc. But then I look at Railway View and that's down, and I'm looking at Cownouts Ward, it's down near St Edmund's School, isn't it? So I look at where that is, and I think 500 metres, Portsmouth City Centre, St Edmund's School, major Tesco's, major Asda's. Why is that in the city centre marked lower than Doyle Court is with the Mountbatten Centre? Just out of curiosity, just wanted to understand the logic behind that argument.
Yeah, I can't list them all off the top of my head, so I will. If you don't mind, can I come back to you on that with a map and tell you where they all are?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, at the end of the day, that the programme is the programme to a certain degree, and it's up to you whether you want to approve it or not. I just want to understand the logic, because looking at the report on face value, I can't see why Railway View has gone backwards and gone lower in the scoring, given where it is, compared to somewhere like Doyle Court that's actually gone up, or arguably even Pembroke Park, which actually is a residents-only area, or some of it is, why that's actually top of the tree.
Can you answer that, Nikki? I know what the answer is.
Pembroke Park is sort of casual phrase in a world of pain. It's surrounded by residents' parking zones. It's on the seafront, next to the pay and display, next to the hovercraft, next to the ferries for the Isle of Wight. And it doesn't have residents-only parking. They're actually council-owned roads.
It's very much the same criteria as Old Portsmouth, which was the first.
I am aware, and it was perhaps a loaded question, because I was heavily involved in the Pembroke Park area when I was a cabinet member, and they were dead set against having an RPZ there. So I guess there's a degree of irony that the gradual RPZ creep that we've got going on is creating that displacement that's made them change their minds in that respect. But yes, here we go. But I would like to have a better understanding of the matrix, because in my view, Railway View should be significantly further up that list than it currently sits.
It's difficult to get. I mean, this is the second time, isn't it, that we've done this listing, and I think you find out there are problems with the first one, so you adjust it, and I think that's always the case. Nikki, were you going to say anything now?
Oh, it's just about obviously Railway View scoring lower than GC Shearer, and what we've really tried to do, going on past meetings like this, we've had a lot of areas that have been waiting a long time for a first survey. And these areas are all surrounded by other parking zones, near other parking zones. They've been waiting a long time, they've been petitioning us for a long time. And the idea was basically to just clear them, to get through them as fast as possible. And then the next areas then are areas that would need potentially a rolling programme if people are in favour, as we've just seen in Southsea. And that includes 2 areas of Cosham, 1 in Paulsgrove and 1 in Fratton.
I think if I remember correctly, Kevin, one of the reasons as well is because they would have less impact with displacement, these 4. Am I right?
Yes, the 5 in the left-hand side of the table are areas we've identified where we don't think there's going to be a significant amount of displacement, so they can be done as a one-off. And that's, as Nikki was saying, the areas to the right, GC Shearer, PG, AB and BC would probably need a rolling programme, because when you put it in, and so we've isolated out the ones that we don't think need a rolling programme and put them first in the programme, so they can be done quickly rather than waiting for the completion of all the rolling programmes.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad that Kevin said no significant displacement with those 5 zones.
What, the second lot?
No, Stamshire might have an issue.
Yeah, well, Stamshire is surrounded by other RPZs. It's a nightmare, that particular area. Any more questions, Councillor Besher? Councillor Heaney.
Thank you. Just a comment, really, I suppose. I think Simon sort of indicated that the report's a bit like a curate's egg, good in parts. And in a sense, I'm glad to see that a number of areas which have been waiting a long time have actually now been addressed, because this is an issue I raised quite a bit last year, and saying, that because I looked at the A, B and BC, the adjacent areas were surveyed in, or were given resident parking zone in 2006, 2007. We're talking a long, long time ago, and they're still waiting for them to be dealt with. And the smaller areas as well, logically could really be dealt with, I think, quite easily, particularly as I think it's probably true that some of them will have limited impact on surrounding areas. I think one of the things I struggled with, a bit like Simon, was looking at the criteria, because I did go back and look at the previous report. But it was almost impossible to compare what you were told in the previous report in 2019 about the criteria with the current criteria. And one of the things about criteria is that they should be an objective way of assessing the need, and it's important that we don't keep changing the criteria because it's like, oh, it's a new year, we'll change the criteria, therefore it changes the order of things, and people never know where they are because people, and the point that's been already been made about my view that it's dropped from being first down to now the fourth in that particular grouping. So I do think we need some consistency about our criteria, and I hope that maybe as a result of this we would develop some criticism criteria that we will now seek to apply consistently across the next few years. We don't keep changing them every year. I don't
know if there's any plans to change every year, but I think Nikki explained it. I mean, when you've got a big area and you have a lot of people requesting it's still only a small percentage of the total area, whereas, I mean, in my ward, for example, there was just one road with 13 houses, but because of what was surrounding them, it was Kenelcombe, I think, granted that a long time ago, because there was a church, a doctor's surgery, a car showroom, and a pub. So 100% of the residents there asked for it, but 100% in a bigger area with, 500 houses or 200 houses, it was a hell of a lot more people. So that's the reason, all right, so it's easy to be wise after the event, but I think having sort of done it that way and then realise there's a better way of doing it, that's the reason why it was changed. Nikki?
Just to reassure Councillor Heaney a little bit, when we first were given this matrix, I think it was designed by consultants, and it's been used elsewhere, and then over the years we've improved it, tailored it more to Portsmouth, and no, there are no plans to make any further changes.
Well, that's quite useful. I think it helps residents both to understand what's going to happen, and their positions won't change year by year, which I think is something we don't want to do, really. I suppose that this is a sort of an interesting thing. If we were going to adopt criteria for schemes based around what's been said here in today's report, I think that does raise the question that if areas don't have any of those pressures, as to whether we should be putting residents' parking schemes in there, even if residents are actually asking for them. Because the point is that in some of those areas, and we saw that with Copner, that putting a residents' parking scheme would not make one iota of difference to the amount of parking available, and therefore the ease of parking. All it would do is would give an exclusivity to particular people and then put pressure on other areas, which I don't think we really would want to do, but that's obviously a decision for the cabinet member when it comes to thinking about these things. I'm broadly, I welcome, as I say, the chance to do these other areas, and now I think I understand a bit better the criteria. Be helpful if you do share it with Simon, if I could also have a copy of any details about the criteria, that would be useful as well.
Yes, I think we send copies to everybody.
There's only one other question I have to ask, and because I have this report in black and white, there is a map on page 21 which shows lots of dots with supposedly slightly different colours, but they all look a bit grey to me. There's a whole lot of dots all around sort of North End, and are they current requests, previous requests for parking in zones in those areas, or not? Could someone just explain briefly what those are? Because it's a bit of a grey area.
Again, I haven't got a colour copy, but they demonstrate where we've had requests, and one colour is where we've had more than 10. Right. So, I think it's orange. You need a colour version. I think it's 2015. I think it's between 2015 and present.
Okay. Right. Okay. Well, obviously this is not being considered as part of this programme or for the next couple of years, so I'll maybe come back to that later, and maybe the council could afford to print a colour copy for Simon and I. We just have two. Oh, there we are.
If I could add to that, Councillor Stagg, it would be nice if we could have colour maps when you do that. It's ironic that the next report actually makes a comment showing the proposed shared RPZ parking bay as pink lines, and yet I've got a black and white picture. That's memorable of that snooker match, isn't it? For those watching in black and white, the pink's behind the green.
I think I'd have to ask Wayne here as the financial boss. Can you afford to have coloured pictures, Wayne, for...
I think these reports are uploaded in colour. The one I just printed off was on there. I've got out on the website.
But in future, following both comments, can we afford to just give the opposition spokespeople colour photographs and maps, please? Thank you. Right?
Yep.
No, I appreciate, it is difficult. So
that's okay. That's
any
all
other comments?
There's no other comments now.
Yes. Well, my personal view well, it's not about residence parking zones, but I mean, we've reached the point. I was asking Kevin this morning did you manage to find out the information? Because the last information I heard from Kevin was that now, on average, there are 1.3 cars registered per household in the city, and there are not 1.3 car parking spaces. Unless you've got off-road parking, there's only space for one car outside the majority of houses. And I think, well, anyway, Kevin, have you got the latest update?
I'm sorry, I don't have the number of households, but...
Can you switch your microphone on, please? Yes, thanks.
The total number of vehicles registered to addresses in Portsmouth is 129,600, according to the DVLA. Of those, 104,500 are cars. The rest are other sorts of vehicles, including HGVs and other. And it is going up. It didn't go up so much between 2019 and 2020, but presumably because of the pandemic, but in 2018 it was 127,000 vehicles, 500, and in 2020, as I said, the total number of vehicles registered in Portsmouth was 129,600. The total number of vehicles includes all vehicles, commercial vehicles and others. The number of cars is 104,500. Compared to 103,400 in 2018. So it's going up by, and it's been a trend for some time, it goes up by about 1% in a normal year.
So that's the reason why we're in this position of having to have residence parking zones. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't need to address the problem. You could just have a free-for-all. And I believe I'm right in saying that car ownership in Portsmouth, 33% of households in Portsmouth do not have access to a car, which is something you were referring to, Carol, in your ward. 47% have one car, and 20% have more than one car. So in other words, 20% of the households have, I think I'm right, I think my maths is right here in saying they've got 53% of the parking spaces, or a bit less than that, because you've got the 33% who don't have vehicles, so those are empty. But obviously they're more than the number of spaces anyway. But 20% of the population have a hell of a lot of the parking spaces in the city, which that's where the problem lies, or part of the problem anyway. So, any other comments? No? Thank you. Well, I'm happy to follow the recommendations. But I think Kevin and Nikki know I've been saying for a long time that quite a few of the areas that have been waiting for a long time need to be addressed. COVID disrupted a heck of a lot of that. Plus, of course, the number of officers to do it. If we had more officers able to do the surveys and the consultations, we could get more in and done more quickly. So that's item 3. Item 4, TRO 48-2021, proposed shared bays, MG/MH permit holders in Owen Street and Ward Road. Kevin, are you going to present this?
Yes, Councillor Stagg, I will. Yeah, this report presents the results of a consultation that we did around Highland Road, and the problem was that the people on the north side of Highland Road, between Hillier Road and Prince Albert Road, do not have any availability of parking along that stretch for them to use in the MH zone. Obviously they look across the road and they're into the MG zone, where they used to be able to park before the zones came into place, and rather than use those spaces they have to walk into considerable distance round to Prince Albert Road. In order to address that problem, we looked at the usage of some of the bays in the roads opposite, and particularly in Ward Street and Ward Road and Owen Street. We identified a total of 3 parking bays which are not outside people's houses but against walls and shops that appear not to be used as much as the others, and to help deal with the complaints from the people in MH, we proposed that those 3 parking spaces are shared between the MG and MH permit holders, so they would be available to either group of permit holders. That limits the use of from the use of MG by the MH permit holders just to those 3 bays. So what we estimate a maximum of 12 cars, but it does help, or it should help, the people on the north side who currently have to walk a long way round before they can find a parking space. And the results of the consultation are detailed in the report. It's clear that a number of the residents in MG don't want people from MH parking in their zone, which is understandable. The report presents a balance of how to deal with the problem by limiting the amount of space that is shared, and so minimises the impact on MG but goes some way to help the people in MH. It's something that we've done in other areas. Old Bridge Road on the boundary between MD and MF, we provided shared bays in the MF area for some people in MD who couldn't find space. So the recommendation in the report is that we amend 3 residence parking bays accommodating approximately 12 vehicles within the MG parking zone to allow MH permit holders, as proposed under TRO 48/2021, and that is implemented, and that the feedback from local people is recorded and used to inform any future proposals should they become necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Jane, I believe you got 3 written deputations.
Yes, that's right, Chair. Okay, the first one. That's from Ms Kay. I understand from a neighbour in Ward Road that you are proposing to open up parking in Ward Road and Owen Street to allow people from the MH zone north of Highland Road to park there because their zone is congested. Our MG zone is also extremely congested, and residents often have difficulty finding parking spaces at night. If you start letting people from one zone park in another zone, what's the point of having parking zones? Apart from PCC erasing revenue from residents who've had to buy parking permits. While I'm writing to you, I'd like to add that the 12 noon till 1 p.m. parking restriction in the MG parking zone really is much more of a pain for residents than a deterrent to visitors to the seafront, and I think you should reconsider it. I have to pay for visitors' parking permits for friends or workmen visiting my house for a few hours during the day when parking isn't normally a problem anyway. It would be much more effective to have a 2-hour restriction in the evening when residents really do need access to parking spaces. I suspect it may also be having a negative effect on businesses in Highland Road, whose customers used to rely on being able to park down one of the side streets. Okay. The second one is from Ms M. And that's afternoon. I live in Highland Road, literally opposite Owen Street MG, where I've parked for the last 14 years, and most of the time never had an issue. Since this parking zone has started, I've been placed in MH zone, which makes no sense, as this is not my closest zone, and considering I'm paying £30 to have a chance of parking near my house, this is not the case. This has had a massive impact on my life and the value of my property, which has decreased. I never get a near parking space anymore. It's not safe to park in such a stressful, busy road. My car has been hit. Not safe to unload my child in car. Parking by a park in a dark, no houses around is just not safe. If my car got stolen, I wouldn't even notice, as I don't even go down that road. I'm having to park further down due to safety, due to my car not being pooed on. My list could go on to the reasons why I shouldn't be in a MH zone. The whole situation is just not fair, just because I live on the other side of the road. The park was going to be a problem, and this was the situation in the flats, and Alma should never have been built with no parking. I've written so many emails, complaints, updates, had sleepless nights. This whole situation has been a nightmare. My house has been here for God knows how many years. I don't even want the option to park in MH zone. I just want to be moved into MG zone. I'm paying £30. For what reason, I still don't get to park near my house. I still lose out, and I've still got the stress. And the third one is from Miss G. And why weren't residents in roads such as mine included on the consultation? Any displacement from Ward Road and Owen Street will clearly come our way. There will inevitably be displacement. If people in Zone MH object to having to walk a distance to park their car, the problem will just shift to other people, which is not solving it. I have to do it regularly. This should have been considered by the council in the planning process, after the referendum and before the zones were mapped out. People will never be happy. You can't tinker with the boundaries forever. What plans will there be to ensure the MH vehicles are only parked in the designated streets? I haven't seen a parking attendant in evidence since just after the scheme started, and I have little confidence MH vehicles won't suddenly appear all over the MG zone, thus defeating the whole point.
Thank you, Jane. Councillor Heaney, any questions, any comments?
Yeah, I do have some questions, actually. Obviously, this is not an area that I know particularly well because I don't represent it, and I did go down and have a walk around, just have a look-see for myself what the area looked like. And I also noticed that we appear to have many more objections to the proposal than there are those in favour. Yet the recommendation is actually to go ahead with this. So I wanted to ask some questions. I wanted to ask some factual questions, first of all, if I may, about the zones, so that I'm clear where we are with this. Do we know how many permits have been applied for and how many spaces there are for both MG and MH zones? So how many spaces in MH, how many permits in MH, how many spaces in MG and how many permits in MG have been issued? Do we know?
I don't have the exact figures with me, but I can tell you the amount of spaces are approximately the same in both zones.
Right.
Both zones have slightly more permits than they have spaces, but MH has more than MG, so the pressure on parking in MH is higher than the parking in MG.
I think quite a few visits have been made at various times of the day as well to see how many spaces there are in Owen Street and Ward.
Yeah. And I think that the fact that both zones have more permits and spaces doesn't mean that all the spaces are necessarily full, because some of those people with permits could have off-street parking, they could at any one time be away. So, and as Councillor Stagg says, I mean, I personally have been down there a number of times, and there are often spare spaces in Owen Street and Ward Street, particularly in those bays, because they're not near people's properties. Obviously, people have a tendency to park as close to their properties as possible.
Okay. The area that was surveyed for this, I'm assuming obviously the two roads affected, Ward Road and Owen Street, were surveyed. How much further afield did the survey go? Did it only survey the Highland Road properties between Hellier and Prince Albert Road, or did it go further than that?
To answer that, are you? No? Says what, sorry?
Well, it just says 68 properties in Owen Street, Ward Road and Highland Road, but it doesn't say how far along Highland Road that went. And I'm saying the only ones in Highland Road you consulted were between Helier and Prince Albert. Is that the only ones that were consulted in Highland Road, or was it further afield in Highland? Because obviously you do Owen and Ward, because they're the two roads affected. So I was just asking how far it went along Highland Road.
Nikki?
Do we know?
Yeah, so that's to do with how we consult. So a copy of the proposal notice is published in the Portsmouth News on the PCC website, and yellow copies are posted up on the street in the affected locations. And that means anyone can comment on our proposals. But during the pandemic, we've also been posting copies of the proposals to affected properties as an extra measure, and these went to properties in Ward Road, Owen Street and Highland Road, both sides between Helier and actually Eastney Road.
Oh, right, okay, so it went to...
So in other words, the area that would be affected?
Yeah, it was to raise awareness of the proposal. Really, the best thing to do is to put notices up where people park. So if they use that parking and it's likely to change, then it's to make them aware of it. Okay,
right, so Eastney Road means it goes further east, yes. Getting my geography right, I was looking at the map here, which was north and south, so further east. Existing map of Owen, Ward and so on, so further down. I mean, I noticed, for example, that the flats where it says 1998 to 1998 on the line of posts actually do have their own parking at the back, because I went and had a wander around, and they do have their own parking. The old Alma Arms doesn't, it's just flats without that. The properties the other side of 185 to Alma Arms are actually empty and with builders' lorries stuck outside them, so there's nobody in there. And West Court, I think, has some parking, but not a lot that I could see. I think they have a few parking spaces, but I don't know what that covers that. And presumably other properties down there don't. I suppose it's possible that residents of Ward Road and Owen Street are very protective of their parking spaces and are maybe anticipating massive problems with that. But as I noticed there's a lot of objections there. So I was wondering if you were minded to do this, whether it might be worth monitoring how it works for, say, 3 months, just to see if it does create extra problems.
Absolutely, that was what I was going to suggest.
Because that would mean that if the problems that they anticipate do happen, because it's completely unrepresented because I was here there this morning, and all but one of the bays had vehicles in them. Sorry, all but one of, the Ward Road and Owen Street all had vehicles in them, and there was only one spare space in one of them. Now, obviously, that's just completely unrepresented. It could change, day by day. So that doesn't really count as a survey. So I'm sure Kevin's seen it more often than I have. And of course, the things would be in the evenings when people obviously want to come home, and is it creating an issue there? I think partly, of course, it's also an issue about the way zones go. Because if I just want to clarify that I've got this correct. The zone north of Highland Road is 8 a.m. to 8 p.m, 3 hours allowed, and then you have to go. Is that correct? Because I saw a notice when I wandered up Prince Albert Road, or is that different? I may not have looked at the right notice. What's the timing for the zone?
MG is 6 p.m. to 8 p.m.
MG 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Right, yeah, okay. And what's MH then?
It's 12 to 1, and then I think 5 p.m. to 6 p.m.
12 to 6, okay, right. Yeah, okay. There are some parking bays in Prince Albert Road that are limited waiting up to 6 p.m, but you can park in them after 6 p.m, and that's another bit. So again, I'm thinking, how much of a problem is this really? And maybe we just ought to trial it for 3 months to see how it works, because we don't want to...
Yes, that's what I
said to residents.
this morning.
One lot of residents are against another lot of residents, because we've got two different boundaries, and maybe we didn't quite sort of pick up that there might be an issue with crossover when the surveys were first done.
But also, I said to Kevin this morning, them having the CEOs on a regular basis, a couple of times a week, to see how it's going, so we get some feedback.
Yeah, so those are my comments really on it, just to clarify, yeah. So,
okay, thank you. Councillor Berger.
Thank you, Councillor Stagg. Just on the point that Graham's raised, you're going to introduce a TRO to make these dual zoned, shall we say, these bays. That's what we're talking about. If you go with a 3 months period, would you do that as a temporary traffic regulation order, or would you have to raise another TRO to take it out if that was the view? Because you're going to go through a statutory 21-day consultation to put this in. That's a month gone before you've even started, and in theory, if you do have to do a TRO to take it out, you're going to have to go through a month's worth of consultation at the end of it. So a simplistic 3 months actually isn't. It could be 6 months potentially with a lot of bureaucracy, or can you just do a temporary traffic regulation order and then remove it? Would be the better way of doing that, I would suggest, wouldn't it?
The answer is no. We can't do a temporary traffic order for parking
Right.
bays, unfortunately. We have consulted on this.
Yeah.
It's taken 5 months to get to Councillor Stagg, because we've already consulted. These are our recommendations. And the recommendation 2.2 is that the feedback from local people is recorded and used to inform any future proposals should they become necessary. And really that's our way of, if this is approved and those spaces are available for 2 lots of permit holders and something crops up and it doesn't work, then we can come back and report on that. Slightly steering away from your point, I wouldn't expect that to happen because the demand for this for the properties on Highland Road is very small, and it hasn't increased in the last 5 months. So we haven't had more people saying we want to park there. Councillor Heaney referred to there's only 4 emails of support. That's how small the demand is. So we've got a very small demand. We're suggesting up to 12 parking spaces for shared, so the people in MG can still park there, the people in MH can still park there. But we have put that caveat in the report. I mean, as always, if something turns out it isn't working, then we can all, look at doing something different.
We did, let's face it, when we did the King's Theatre residence parking zone, we said we would go back after 6 months, which we did, and we don't really want to do a full review like that because it's such a big area, but this is a small area, so it's quite possible to do.
Perhaps call me stupid if you want to, don't all jump in at once, but this is largely a factor that I see it of geography, in the fact that people that had the nearest available parking spaces to them in this particular area now find themselves having much, much longer journeys because where they've traditionally parked has found itself in a zone which they are not entitled to park in at this moment in time. That's where we're at, and it is in the bigger picture things, it's a small problem, but it is clearly a big issue for some of these people. And what we're doing is creating a traffic regulation order to make some of these areas this effective fuzzy boundary that we've talked about in the past. And I sort of get that, but you've effectively opened up little areas to twice as many people now because it's on the boundary of 2 zones who wish to park there, because anybody from either zone can park there. And it's really only affecting a small area of people. As a suggestion, and somebody's going to shoot me down straight away, when a resident applies for a permit, their address dictates the fact that they are in whichever zone they are. Is there any way to get around this, that certain areas where we've identified a problem, a resident's vehicle can be dual zoned? So rather than dual zone the parking spaces, you're looking at the resident and saying, you actually have a permit that entitles you to park in one or the other. So therefore it limits it to where the issue is, rather than opening it up to 2 zones to park in. I don't know, it might be a way around it that would solve the TRO and this issue going forward, perhaps.
Nikki?
It would still require a TRO, but then where do you draw the line? If you've got someone that wants a permit for 2 zones, that's could potentially undermine both parking zones. And I think this one comes back to the point you made that this is a very small demand and it's a very localised area. And this proposal is proportionate to that. So we've got, I think as Councillor Heaney mentioned, there's flats there, there's disused businesses, and there's some very old terraced housing. And it's the terraced housing that's been there for probably over 100 years, has no rear access via the MG zone, no off-road parking, W lines in front. And they've got to walk quarter of a mile to get to their zone. But it's a handful of people. So either giving people permits for 2 zones, which we can't set up under our current system and would require a change of policy, rather than changing the boundaries, which is another big undertaking, and there's no demand for it. So there are people on there that are quite happy with their parking zone. And so really what we've tried to present is something that's worked elsewhere, at least 3 occasions that we've done this. And we've come up with a proportionate proposal. But I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding, there's been a lot of hearsay, misinformation that we've seen in the deputations that I've seen on social media, where they think that people north of Highland Road are going to be able to park in this zone. And that's just not the case. So it's trying to explain that this is a very carefully considered proposal that's worked somewhere else, well, 3 other locations, and we've been careful to select parking bays that aren't outside people's houses. They're not adjacent to the co-op car park, the co-op itself. And so we've put in that caveat that if something unusual happens or it doesn't work, then we can come back. But out of all the options available, this seems to be the best one.
I was just sort of talking out the top of my head just to try and be helpful as much as anything else, and to sort of help you, Lynn, because we have a situation here where a small number of people have been negatively impacted, and not by displacement traffic necessarily, it's by the geography of where they live as much as anything else. And you have always been consistent when it comes to residence parking zones and say you always go with the majority. The majority in this case are saying reject it. And it seems incongruous to actually reject this based on, and therefore affect some people that are a victim of the geography of actually where they live. But on face value, if you are going to maintain that consistency, then you've got to reject this because the majority are against this.
But it needs to also to be based on evidence, and the evidence is that there is parking spaces in those 2 roads. If that isn't the case, if it doesn't work out that way, then we can do a rethink. But it's the fact that they haven't got any parking space at all on Highland Road because of the WL lines. And this happens in other parts of the city.
Can I just add to that you've got potentially 4 people who would like this proposal to go forward versus the residents of 2 long terraced roads. So you're never going to get a majority in favour because there aren't that many people affected.
I discovered something quite recently that I didn't know, that you don't actually have to go with a majority in the consultation, which surprised me a lot.
No, that's true.
Well, you were of the view that the public sabotaged the Elm Grove cycle.
Oh, there was evidence of that. Yes. They were actually physically the ones were taken out and put in various parts of the road and the pavement, and that was witnessed by people as well. So there's plenty of evidence of that. So, but let's try it. If it doesn't work, as I say, we do a rethink, and I think that's being fair to everybody. Any other comments?
No, I think we just need to change the recommendations.
Well, I think a caveat, that, and I said this morning, is that if it doesn't work, I think if we have a review, have a look at it again in 3 months' time. I would go with the recommendation, but I think we do need to check it out in 3 months' time. And can we please have CEOs on a regular basis there to make sure that it doesn't happen on a daily basis or
I think, Lynn, just for clarity, you would need to add a 2.3 that it is
Yes.
reviewed after 3 months, just so that it goes onto MIS in the right way, rather
Yes.
than do it informally and get
Can you add
lost.
that, Jane?
Can I clarify that? Because obviously we're going to look at local feedback that we've received, say in 3 months' time. If we've had none, then we wouldn't need to review it. Is that right? So that's the point of checking what people have told us. We can look at it over a 3-month period.
Well,
Then should we see what?
I sort of get what you're
think?
saying, but I mean, if you're going to review it in 3 months' time, then effectively you need to go out and seek views to actually review it. To not go looking for views so that you get the result you want is probably not the way to go about it. So you're probably going to need to actually do some sort of survey of some description informally.
Well, I think we can rely on CEOs and the information coming back from them, because if they are giving out tickets to people who are not in the area or are from not in the area, then we've got evidence that it's not working.
Well, they'll either be from MG or MH, won't they? Most of the cars that use it.
Yeah, they could well be. I mean, I think we will work around that.
Can I just explain? This is how this proposal came about, because obviously we introduced the 2 parking zones. We didn't do another survey because they'd just been put in. This proposal is solely in response to what people have told us. So if we wanted to do something different in future, we need to know what people have...
Can I just ask them, when you reviewed the King's Theatre area, what process did you put in place to review that after 6 months?
That was a survey, yes.
That was a unique survey to that area, because when we did the formal consultation, we had so many different suggestions of different operating times. We wanted
Perhaps
to make
I'm just
sure...
being a little bit pedantic here, but if you want to review it after 3 months, I think you need to seek the views. If we've done a review elsewhere, albeit 6 months, and we did something to either leave it as it is or to take it out or amend it or whatever we actually did, you need to have a degree of consistency whenever you do that.
I would agree, and it is only the 2 streets, isn't it? So it's not as if it's a huge
It is,
area.
but we've done this elsewhere and not reviewed it.
Well, I think...
Could I just suggest, I think what we're saying is review the feedback. So if we get negative feedback, that we look at that. If we go out and ask people again, we're likely to get, everybody is quite precious about their own parking space, and there are a lot more people in Owen Street and Ward Road than there are on Highland Road, and we're likely to get a similar result to the TRO. What we're suggesting with the TRO is that this is a small change which will benefit a small group of people and not disbenefit the larger group on the opposite side that much. But if it causes problems, I'm sure we would want to look at it. But if we go and ask people whether there's...
And there are only 12
whether
car
they
parking
like it,
spaces. It's not as if it's the whole of each road. It's just those 12 car parking spaces which can be dual use.
And could I also say, I think if we're going to review the feedback, then we should do it 3 months after it's implemented, rather than...
I think the point I'm making is, and it comes back to the matrix, if you like, that we talked about in the first thing, is that you have a degree of consistency. If we're talking about reviewing this after 3 months, the TRO goes in, it has 3 months, then it is reviewed and it's either left or it's amended or whatever happens. I have no issue as to what that outcome, and I'm not going to second guess it. The first point being a little bit picky with regards to the report, you need to have a recommendation that goes through MIS that says it's going to be reviewed. So you have to have a 2.3 recommendation that people can hang their hat on to see that's what's actually going to happen. And it doesn't make any difference between, in my view, whether it's 12 parking spaces or 1,200 parking spaces. If you've had a predetermined, that's what we do after 3 months, you still need to follow that through, in my view.
Well, for consistency, what did we do with Campbell Road?
Nothing, because it went in. We didn't have any feedback. So all these proposals that I think MD was the exception to the rule. We don't carry out reviews normally. That was just a unique area. and we don't review our proposals after if they're implemented, as a matter of course.
And isn't Devonshire Avenue the same? Isn't that got...
Yeah, that's shared bays on both sides.
Yeah, and what do we do with that?
Well, we would look to change it if feedback from local people is that it's not working.
And did we get feedback?
No.
So, there was consistency.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Well, so you need to have two things.
Yeah, that's fine, yes.
Would it help if we changed 2.2, that instead of feedback from local people is recorded, is reviewed? Would that be a better word?
Yes, I think that's a good idea.
That's fine, but you're talking about a 3 month, so you need to include that 3 month in that as well. Yeah.
That's fine, yeah, no problem. Okay, then I'm happy to go along with that. Have you got that, Jane, the wording? Lovely, thank you. So I'm happy to go with that recommendation. And now we're on to item 5, which is proposed extension of MH parking zone. Now I think we have some... I've lost them now.
Chair, may I?
Deputations.
Yeah, about the deputations. We have one written deputation, and we did have 3 requests to speak, but we only have 2 who've come today.
Sorry. So we have one in person, yes?
2 people.
Two in person.
Mr. Herrivan and Mr. Knights.
Are you both? Are you making deputations? My apologies, I thought it was just one of you. So would you like to go first? If you introduce yourself, and then we go to the written ones afterwards, Jane.
Hello, my name's John Paul Knights, and I'm a resident of Henderson Road. I have timed this at bang on 6 minutes, so I'll try and make it as brief as possible. So first off, a little history and background. I'm a 17-year resident of Henderson Road and have one small car in the household. 17 years ago, parking outside was never an issue. It's become steadily worse since then, culminating in today's meeting. A number of things have caused this issue. The bike lane installed along the seafront and removal of the free vertical parking along a large length has pushed people along. The 20-mile-an-hour speed limit and speed bumps with associated extensions to double yellow lines. Additional disabled bays, which I obviously don't contest, I just include for completeness. There's an electric parking bay recently installed. I've only ever seen it used once, and upon investigation I can see why. Charging is expensive as buying a tank of petrol for it. Someone's making some money. Most importantly, the creation of the MH parking zone across the street, and that's closely tied in terms of when the most disruption has occurred, was the lack of cars disappearing during the day due to lockdown and COVID workplace disruption. So these last 2, the MH and home working, have shown the greatest change. Previously, parking before 4 p.m. was much easier. Now it's terrible. So the largest issue is therefore the adjacent MH parking zone. People not entitled to park in a restricted zone are naturally pushed towards the borders where the problem re-emerges. I've heard talk of creep and displacement. I think you're probably well aware of this issue. So it's this situation we find ourselves, just as the MH zone found itself previously, and the eastern end of Henderson Road will find itself in a year's time. These zones are not fixing the problem, they're just pushing them to the periphery. In the same way cars and vans from the MH zone park in Henderson and surrounding roads, residents unable to then park push onto Lydiard Gardens, and eastwards is just dominoes. I've spent some time reading the 53-odd pages of the report, and only in reading that report did I realise that you were just not soliciting comment, but actively seeking alternatives too. So I'd like to highlight its flaws as I see it and suggest some alternatives. So my first issue was, in my recollection, the original survey questioned, do you think there is a parking problem? Or similar wording. This seems to have now changed to essentially, do you support these parking proposals? It's gone from identifying an issue to supporting the solution, which worries me as as a case of misrepresentation, possibly. the biggest issue for me was in a scheme to improve parking, what sort of planner suggests a 78-metre increase in double yellow lines? That's reducing parking for 17 cars and calling that improving the parking situation. I did note that the revised version of this drops 14 metres of that 78 metres. If this is how other zones have been implemented, no wonder there's an issue. Car parking is tough in a mainly terraced city, surrounded on three sides by water, but a plan to improve parking by removing parking spaces is surely the work of I will not say the next word because it's not very polite in the circumstances. So thirdly, point 6.8.1 states that these double yellow lines received support or no comments. Comments from the public 54 and 57 both referenced double yellow lines but were stricken and said that there was support or no comments. So fourthly, general cost issues were covered in the comments quite deeply, and I won't mention it too much today, but versus an apparently unknown parking fine income. I mean, I'd wager that knowing the PCN numbers from other parking areas would give you a good idea of what the income would be. Certainly would be enough to cover ongoing costs of a car and a traffic warden. So this is versus lowball revenues of £9,500 a year. A business that returns pure profit by the end of year 2 is a good business, and I wonder if you're seeking outside investment. People don't mind a small outlay, but this is treating them like a cash cow. So what's a better solution to the issue? First of all, I'd like to say thank you to all the respondents who took the time to reply, reading their So firstly, at the very least, please don't make the area an extension of the MH zone. The overspill from MH is the single largest issue we have. If none of my words make any change, let it be that a separate MJ zone as per the first consultation is put in place along the lines of the 101st respondent's words. Secondly and lastly, increase the available parking spaces. Both Henderson Road and Bransbury Road are wide roads, with Henderson being more residential and less prone to through traffic. A forward-thinking solution would be to use this width to increase parking, with one eye on the issue before us today and another on the building of the swimming pool/sports complex on Bransbury Park coming up shortly. So a one-way system similar to the one by the old prison would work wonders. Diagonal parking on one side and street parking on the other would improve spaces by 50% in those areas, with traffic being directed eastwards down Bransbury and westwards down Henderson. This would make use of the spare transit capacity along the seafront, increase parking for residents and the new leisure centre, not rule out a parking zone in the future, and most importantly solve the problem by increasing parking and not reducing it. Well, by my count, that's just under 6 minutes, so my last words will be, please don't enact it in its current form. It will not solve the problem, just kick the can or the car down the road, while not benefiting residents in a substantive way. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to tell us who you are and where you come from?
Right, yes, I'd just like to introduce myself. I'm Martin Herriven, and I live at number 17. Approximately 7 years with my other half, and during that 7 years, yes, parking in Lydiard Gardens has just got consistently worse. Just to give you sort of one or two examples to give a bit of background to my thoughts, yes, we're getting things like people doing park and rides. We're getting people travelling from other parts of the city, leaving their cars in Lydiard Gardens during the day, and vans at night and at weekends. And I must admit, vans are one of the things that we're particularly sort of concerned about. And the parking of these vans isn't always done in a safe manner. So what cheeses us off a little bit in Lydiard Gardens, I mean, it's fair enough, I realise, you have to accept people coming in from other parts, other roads to park there. You just wish they'd do so safely. And coming on to safety, I would just like to add that I've just spent 2 previous days, I work at BAE as a design engineer, and the 2 previous days have been spent doing safety courses. And it just struck me that the degree of safety we go to at BAE, and then as soon as I leave work and come into the city, you know, that the disregard for safety is really noticeable by a lot of people, you know, that disregard safety, where they park, just the manner of using the road just seems to be getting worse and worse all the time. But, so I just wanted to mention that, but to go on from that, I do fully support living in Lydia. And I do fully, absolutely, sorry to contradict what the other gentleman just said, I fully support in Lydiard Gardens the idea of double yellow lines, because where I live, it really is getting dangerous sometimes. Lydiard Gardens is a cul-de-sac. People go up there at speed, and you know, we could almost do with speed bumps really, because the speed that people travel at up there. And I'd just like to go on to my own, the thing I'm sort of more concerned with, to be honest, is where I live. My house sides onto Lydiard Gardens, and I have got a drive, and at the bottom of my drive there's an entrance at 90 degrees to Lydiard Gardens that leads to 3 driveways and into a private car park with 30 spaces. And to go back to this problem with vans that has become in more recent times, it sort of horrifies me that people will park right up against this entrance with the back end of a van, and when you're coming out of that entrance, you just have no idea, you just cannot see what is coming. So I'm fully supportive of the proposal to put double yellow lines across this entrance and to carry it on a little way from number 12 towards number 17, and I think that would be a marvellous solution to give people just a chance to see what's coming. And also in that vicinity there's a proposal to put double yellow lines on the other side of the road, I think from the lay-by through to number 116. And that would be a brilliant idea as well, because when cars are parked along there, it is really dangerous. You come round a blind corner, and when cars are parked there, you just come into a single stretch, and if cars are coming the other way, you're just asking for trouble. That was highlighted, by the way, the previous weekend with Victorious taking place.
You're coming to the end of your 6 minutes.
Oh, have I gone over, sorry?
Well, no, you're coming to the end of it.
Oh, am I? Sorry. Didn't realise that got so long. So yes, I would particularly like to support those 2 bits of double yellow lines, and any double yellow lines in Lydiard Gardens that will make it safer. And I just hope when the parking zone, if the parking zone goes ahead, I hope that won't push people onto private spaces. That's my only worry. But I do think it might stop people coming from other areas at some distance and parking in Lydiard Gardens. Sorry if I've used up all my time. I think I've said everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Jane, you have, is it 3 or 4 written deputations? 4. Thank you.
First one's from Mr. A, who's a resident of Ringwood Road. I also question the interpretation of for, against and no preference from the feedback you have shown in the report. Having read every feedback item, I have detailed my interpretation in the table below, and this has been passed on to you 3 councillors. I would recommend this being reassessed with resident feedback on the interpretations rather than a biased view from the people trying to implement the scheme. Also, taking into consideration what is written in the feedback, rather than simply looking for the words object or support. There are clear trends highlighted in the feedback. People supported the MJ zone, not the extension of MH. This information cannot be used to support this scheme. Many people have highlighted that the extension of MH will not work. Many people have reluctantly voiced support of any scheme, purely due to the neighbouring zones pushing vehicles into the residence areas, further supporting the point above that an extension will not be of benefit. These should not be explicitly taken as support for the scheme. Lots of the feedback, although stating support, requests differing times for restrictions, additional times, permanent restrictions. This should not be considered support for the scheme, as this is something you cannot deliver with an extension of MH zone. The table of feedback listed by the numbered item in the report, first table purely on wording, second table actually looking at what they're saying and questioning if the MH extension solves their issue. This does not take into account the huge number of people who mention how bad the parking has become since the introduction of MH zone, to which this scheme will do nothing to relieve. And he's included a table which shows exactly that, which you've seen. It's based on two criteria. One was based simply on the wording of support, and the other was actually reading the content and seeing if they support the MH extension specifically. Okay. Oh, and the other one, sorry. Here you are. The second one is from a resident in Lydiard Gardens. Lydiard Gardens is a no-through road similar to Dun Close, Tamarisk Close and Cockleshell Gardens, and I can see no benefit to the residents. The extension of double yellow lines is unnecessary, as we do not currently have a problem, and I do not understand the necessity for it. Permit parking is not going to reduce the problem of parking, as we already have residents from MH zones in other streets using the area to park. As mentioned, the private and public sections of Lydiard Gardens are not easily identified, and I feel this will cause more confusion in the future if this proposal goes ahead. When I have visitors between 6 and 8 p.m, I will have to supply them with a 12-hour permit for this short period, which I also object to. I strongly object to the whole proposal.
Is that it, Jane? Thank you.
Two written deputations.
Oh, right, I thought there were more. Councillor Heaney, and you've got any comments or questions?
Yes, I do actually. It's just getting a bit of clarity about how far the consultation went. The area that was selected for the formal consultation are the sort of terraced roads that were at the end of the previously consolidated MJ zone. But I noticed we have some comments from residents in the existing MH zone. So again, would this have been people who responded to the notices on lampposts rather than people who got direct letters about it? Is that what we're talking about here? Because I see there are comments of support and comments of opposition from residents of MH zone to this proposal. But you mean that's the existing MH zone?
Yeah.
So
we had street notices, newspaper, website, and then we sent copies of the proposal to residents of Eastney Road, both sides, which is the boundary road. But there's been a lot on social media about this, and some people obviously responded to that, whereas they may not necessarily have had the notice.
They might not have seen the proposals in detail. They were responding presumably on what's here. Yeah. And when this first came forward, back in December, I think it was, the two proposals were MH zone and then the initial survey of MJ zone. The initial survey of the MJ zone, which includes the existing roads which we're talking about today, was a majority of people were against overall, but it was indicated that some of those roads closer to Eastney Road, the terraced roads mainly, were more in favour. And whilst I recognise that obviously that did raise an issue and it needed to be addressed, my concern was that the initial survey had been done on the basis of the whole zone, i.e. all of the people in the proposed MJ were asked whether they wanted it or whether they didn't. The decision was made at that cabinet meeting that there would be a formal consultation on only part of the originally initial survey MJ zone. And I raised a concern that what about the residents who'd already written about this and had opposed it, who were living in the other part, who would now find they were potentially having a full-blooded zone right next to them, and that they might change their view if they knew a full zone was going to be implemented. Because once we've done the initial survey, it's very unlikely that the full survey which we've just done, the full survey, would result in a refusal. And I said that I thought we ought to at least inform the residents of the whole zone, i.e. the bit we're just doing today and the previous bit that we'd initially surveyed, that now there was likely to be a new zone and whether they had changed their view on it. Because I took the view that what would happen is that there was likely to be overspill into the eastern end of the MJ zone, which was the initial survey. And therefore we should at least give them the opportunity to see whether they change them, because I suspect some of them probably would, and we might end up with a different view, but I don't think you were minded to do that at the time. So I think what we've got now is two potential problems. One is, because you've now created an enlarged MH zone, the roads west of Eastney Road will now be able to park in the roads east of Eastney Road, so any overspill from those roads will now come into this new zone, well, which is now going to be the enlarged MH. And the residents who are in the area east of that, who originally didn't want it, will now find overspill coming from the enlarged MH zone going into their roads. And they've been not given an opportunity to say, actually, we could have dealt with all this in one go, in a sense, by saying there'll probably be overspill and problems, and then we'll get another request, and they might be some years down the road before they ever get their problems dealt with. And I just thought that this was not the right way to handle this one. We should have done another stage in this that allowed the residents who'd already initially surveyed and said no to maybe change their mind on the basis that the terms on which they were consulted had changed and they were now facing a different situation. So that was my concern at the time, and I think this is what has happened, and I think the consequences of that could obviously mean that the knock-on consequences for the roads who said no will be quite serious, and they might have to wait on the basis of what we've had previously, years before any problem is dealt with, and we could probably have dealt with that in one go.
Can I just say that happens with most consultations, because the people living in the next area, which is what resulted in the rolling programme, because people in the next area are likely to have displacement. But if I think the geography of that particular, the MJ zone, because it was long and thin,
yes,
all right, and not compact, and it was very obvious that the western side, there were far more people in favour of having it than the eastern side. If we'd have said, well, let's go back and do the whole lot again, the people on the western side who originally wanted it would have had to wait it even longer. If the people on the eastern side, and this has happened, I think, is it GA, one of the ones around Fratton Park, they initially didn't want their zone, but since the other zones around have gone in, they've asked for their zone to be reconsulted on. So this can happen, so the eastern side can be reconsulted on. Am I right there, Nikki?
Yes, sorry, yes you are. Obviously we can resurvey them if it in the future. I was just going to say that obviously they were consulted, so obviously there's a lot of notices around. They're not in just these 6 roads, they're around, so they were aware of it. I think, well actually I know what came out of the survey, and the reasons why they weren't interested in permit parking is because that other end of Henderson Road and those other properties have got off-road parking. So if they do get displacement, it won't affect them so much. And I think that's why they voted against it, because if you've got a driveway, why would you want to buy a permit? Whereas the western end of Henderson Road is basically terraced houses and no off-street parking. So we consult in the same way on a parking zone, but under COVID we have put in extra measures in case people, some people don't go out as much, but there's still those on-street notices for people to see.
So, have you had any views from any of the residents in the roads not covered by the existing MH extension? Because
To be honest, I don't
couldn't
know.
recognise it, because it only says Henderson Road. It doesn't say which bit of Henderson Road, whether it's in the zone or outside the zone. It's not really easy to tell. I mean, I suppose my point...
I think
can I
Nikki's
just say
got some information.
Yeah, so we did have 3 objections from people outside of the proposed zone.
Yeah. Right, okay. As I say, I think this area is relatively self-contained. So if you had consulted on the change, I mean, I think the point I kept making was that you consulted on one proposal and residents were given that view about what's happened. You got the results and then you changed the terms under which the scheme will be introduced by deciding to... What you did, because you didn't tell them when you did the initial consultation that if only part of the area voted for a scheme, we might consider introducing it only into those roads. So
But you
people...
know, the strange thing is, Councillor Heener, that when we've done this with the rolling programme, we've then been accused of preempting things and putting it to people in the surrounding areas. So whatever we did, we're going to be wrong. So
No, not necessarily. Once you've made that decision, then to take part of the MJ zone and call it the extended MH, my view is that you should have informed the other residents that was happening to see if they wished to change their mind and whether you would have been in a position maybe to extend that if they had changed their minds. But anyway, we are where we are now. That's not going to happen. I may turn out to be wrong that what has been said about off-street parking may mean there is not a problem, but potentially I think there could be, and we'll have to wait and see what residents say. But if residents do complain that there's been a knock-on effect, I will certainly be supporting them in getting the problems resolved if that happens to be the case. So.
I think the advice came from ward councillors as well, didn't it?
I just wanted to say about the survey. The survey isn't a consultation. It gathers information on parking in an area when any problems occur, and then that helps us to develop any proposals. There's a lot of surveys that we undertake that people don't want permit parking. It doesn't go any further, which is obviously a lot less work for us, but it's responding to what people want. So, you know, the MJ, we had a majority of in favour of permit parking, well, of a zone for 88 people in favour and 65 against. So that's why we then developed the proposals. It's not a unique situation. Any area that we survey, in the past we've again developed proposals where people are in favour of it, because we don't want to force schemes on people that don't want it. So the way the rolling programme's coming to an end, it's because 3 areas that were surveyed have said they don't want permit parking, so now we've got this revised programme that's just been approved.
Just out of interest, has this situation ever happened before? Because I was wondering, have we ever gone out to the other area before? You know, like the eastern part of.
I think
to reconsult.
Reconsult. I don't want to say yes or no, because obviously we've got 40 odd parking zones in. But as you know, say in your ward, for example, in Baffins, we proposed a parking zone over a large area, and then what was implemented was much smaller, and no kickback from that.
Any other questions or comments?
No, well, I hope there is no kickback. I hope people are satisfied and it doesn't cause a problem.
Well, if there's a kickback, we would do the same as we were doing in I can't remember, is it GA or it's G something? GB, right. And reconsult, because the impact of being surrounded by RPZs has caused the local residents to ask to be resurveyed, reconsulted. So we can do that.
But I think we're also going to have to look at the impact of making it the MH zone, because as I say, that will allow vehicles on the east side regional road metering to then use that area.
Yes,
so that would,
yes.
Can I make a comment on that as well? Just that a lot of people in these roads under these proposals have experienced extra parking from MH, I think is gentleman there said, but they're people that don't want to buy permits, or they've got vehicles that aren't eligible for permits. So if you introduce these proposals, they'll have to go back or apply for permits or find somewhere else to park.
Councillor Bowsher.
I think Nikki's actually just sort of summed it up perfectly. Find somewhere else to park, because I mean, we are where we are, and I don't suppose these two gentlemen would have been here giving deputations if there wasn't suddenly a parking issue that had been created in their area, fundamentally on the back of displacement parking, because that's what we're talking about. And I perhaps find the term rolling programme a little bit misleading, because it's more of a displacement programme as much as anything else. You're going to make the decision that you're going to make, but I can remember 2 or 3 years ago, probably slightly longer than that as well, that if you look at the two zones that are sort of close to it, MG and AMH, which is what we're talking about here, there was essentially no appetite for residents parking in those two areas. Yes, there might have been localised parking problems, but generally people rubbed along and they parked and they got along okay. And that's certainly the case, because up until recently I had friends that lived in Henderson Road, and I've never had a particular issue parking down that area. All right, granted I could never park directly outside their front door, but walking 100 yards or whatever didn't really present too much of an issue. But we're here looking at this because of the displacement parking that's crept all the way across to the eastern side of the island in that respect. And I think, as I said, I think Nikki has just summed it up. They found somewhere else to park. They found this area to park because they've got shunted further east. They're now cluttering up areas where they don't want to pay for a parking permit, and they're going to have to find somewhere else to park now or buy a permit. Well, if they found somewhere else to park, that's what they'll be looking to do again, is find somewhere else to park. I mean, looking at this one, Councillor Stagg, you are probably going to implement it, I think, but I think we sort of need a little bit of reflection in the fact that would we be where we are today if we hadn't had this creep across the city with a desperation for residents' parking zones, when even your own former councillor Steve Pitt, who lives in the MH area, was on record 2 or 3 years ago saying there won't be a parking zone where I live because there's no desire for it, and yet here we are, and he lives smack bang in the middle of MH.
But let's go back further than that, Councillor Bowsher. Why are we having residence parking zones in the first place? Because there are too many vehicles. And the first one that came in was in Portsmouth, and that was not because there were too many vehicles, but too many vehicles being parked by people going to the Isle of Wight and leaving their vehicles there. And that's how it came about when Ken Elcombe was parking manager. That was 1999. And since then, the number of vehicles in the city has increased, so we're now exceeding the amount of parking spaces. That's the reason that's causing people to look further afield, because there's no room outside their own houses. I go home tonight now and there'll be no place for me to park. I'll have to, if I'm lucky, I might find somewhere up north of College Park, but otherwise there won't be, and that's right across the city.
At the end of the day, Councillor Stagg, it comes back to what Kevin was talking about with his statistics that he chucked out earlier on about the number of cars that we actually have in the city. But having said that, on the back of a question that Councillor Heaney was asking about the previous two zones that we were talking about, MG and the MH overlap, and were the zones oversubscribed, Kevin went into a long explanation about the fact that some people are away and some people have off-road parking, to say that there isn't a parking issue in those two areas to justify it. You also need to look at the demographics of the actual properties. It's very easy to take the number of vehicles in the city and divide it by the number of properties and get that. And there are going to be certain areas where you are going to have an issue, or you're going to have it something like one of my neighbours, bless them, that have 5 cars in their family, but actually they can get 4 of those vehicles off-road because of the nature of it. So for every example of a terrace property you've got with 3 vehicles, you potentially got somewhere else that's actually offsetting it, and those sorts of overarching statistics I don't actually think tell the true problem or the true issues that have got going down, and it would be very interesting to actually see that broken down ward by ward, particularly on what Councillor Corkery was saying about his ward earlier on, to get a better understanding of the number of vehicles that you've actually got. But then you'll naturally come into a debate about public transport and affordability and a variety of the other issues that we actually have going forward, and it becomes a bigger story than just chucking out the number of vehicles per household in the city of Portsmouth that we may or may not have, without actually drilling down into the facts of the matter. But it doesn't change the fact that that whole eastern area of MH, MG, I think there's a ward above it, is it one above it, MI, is it? There was no appetite for residents' parking zones there, because it was essentially around the old Portsmouth area that there were issues, and the demographic. And you could argue that the whole thing, and where we are today, and the horse that's been decided that has ended up looking like a camel, was all around the MB and MZ zones in the centre of Southsea and the King's Theatre. That is what has created this push, so that a lot of people are now finding themselves pushed out of where they have traditionally parked without an issue in as far as we are talking now, which is right down into Eastney. There's never traditionally been an issue there, but if you're going to actually talk about those sorts of problems down in that neck of the woods, we've got to start looking at making sure that the public transport is actually something that is effective and affordable for those people to actually use it. And I could go on about what's happening in the north of the city, which is a bit of a dog's dinner around Portsbridge roundabout and stuff like that, but that's a debate for another day. But we are where we are at the end of the day. You're going to approve this. It's your decision to do so. But I would suggest that for these gentlemen and others, playing around with double yellow lines may well have had safety issues. That's a different issue. They were talking about safety rather than parking. But certainly when it came down to residents' parking zones, 2 or 3 years ago, it wouldn't have even been on their radar because there wasn't an issue.
I agree, because there were fewer cars. There were fewer cars then. I've got an article from the Portsmouth Evening News, as it was called then, in 1968, I think it is, and the front page, the headline on the front page was 10,000 cars in Portsmouth. Something needs to be done about it. 10,000 cars. What did you say there were now? 129,000 registered. So there's the problem. So, and you say I've got an appetite for residence parking zones. I prefer not to have any residence parking zones at all, because they're the bane of my life as far as this portfolio is concerned. But we're trying to find a solution to a problem that is really outside of control. We cannot create any more parking spaces than there are existing. So, anyway, have you got any other... Nikki.
Sorry, has Councillor Bosher finished? I don't want to jump in. Did you finish?
Yeah, so I was just falling off my soapbox now.
It's just the comment about double yellow lines, which has been raised. I thought maybe I hadn't introduced enough double yellow lines in the city, and maybe this was an opportunity for some more. I haven't been doing this for far too long. Just to explain that the proposed double yellow lines don't take away any legitimate parking spaces. Where we won't be able to mark parking bays, we put double yellow lines opposite or on the entrances or junctions that are unprotected. Because quite often when you introduce a parking zone, people will park in the most ridiculous places to avoid using the parking bays that you wouldn't necessarily think of beforehand. So it's part of creating a controlled parking zone. So every part of the highway is restricted. Thanks.
Thank you, Nikki. I was going to ask Wayne to, the gentleman here on the right said something about finances which didn't add up in my head, but maybe I'm wrong. Perhaps you could explain something about the permits?
I think you made some comments about why we hadn't estimated the amount of parking fine income. And the reason being is it's quite simple. It's down to the fact that we don't know what the level of, what's the word I'm looking for, contravention is. And also, what we tend to find is that when you introduce a new scheme, you have a big spike in the amount of contraventions, and then that tails off, and that's not something that happens every single year. What we can do is do an estimate of what we think the first permit income will be, and we're quite I'm as honest about it as I can be within the comments that, yeah, £9,500 a year, plus visitor permits, plus any second permits, plus any fines. And we're not, the reason why I don't put a number in there is that I just don't know sitting here today. The other thing that's really important, which goes into, you made a comment about how the council are making a lot of money from this. It goes into a parking reserve that by statute can only be spent on certain things, and if you have a look at when you get home, just Google it, and really those things are around road safety, anything to do with transport, and those sorts of things. So it can't be used, say, I don't know, to build a new library. You couldn't, or a leisure centre or anything like that. It can only be used for those specific things. So the money doesn't affect the amount of cash we get in for, say, council tax and that sort of thing, if that helps.
Yes.
Yeah, so as far as the financial side goes, it's a very small part of my issue. It's more just summarising what other people have said, but the figures in there were £16,500 in costs for implementing signage and whatnot, and £9,500 per year for the £30 resident permits, and then obviously more from that. Like I say, that the financial side of it is not massive. I just wanted to highlight that this thing is going to pay for itself very, very quickly, whether you can spend that on, I don't know, shindigs at the Guildhall or traffic matters is by the by, really. I just wanted to use my final word to say the big thing from my comment was that the MJ zone was the thing surveyed.
Yes, we understood. I just wanted that clarification, and it's not a cash cow. It really isn't.
Again, that's
okay.
To get attention more than anything. But please do consider the MJ zone as opposed to the MH. And thank you very much for the two councillors in front. Your comments and your sort of words have been enlightening for me, and good to see that local councillors are fighting. Thank you.
We try and listen to everybody, but it's very difficult. Right, in spite of what you're saying, I'm going to approve the recommendations, but I will guarantee, and I will guarantee this, that if there is feedback from the eastern side, that we will certainly go ahead and resurvey them. Okay, thank you.
Chair, may I just ask? Chair?
I'm sorry.
Is that part of the formal decision, what you just said about it being reviewed?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm not saying we'll review it, but what I'm saying is we'll do exactly the same as we've done with GB, that if it comes up again, then we will certainly consider it, because obviously we do not want to have areas affected negatively, if possible. Very difficult with parking, but there we are. And I think the last one now is proposed parking restrictions in various locations. Kevin.
Thank you. This report deals with TRO 39, which had 28 proposals. It was consulted on between the 28th of May and the 18th of June. There were objections received to proposals in the 6 roads detailed in paragraph 5.1. The comments that we received are set out in full in Appendix B. In summary, Hayling Avenue, the proposal was to shorten yellow lines on the north side of the junction with Marina Grove by 5 metres at each end, but in view of the objections, we're recommending not to implement that change. Cheslin Road, there was concern about parking on the bend and the footway opposite the service road to the flats. The objections highlight concern about the loss of parking, so we're recommending scaling back the double yellow lines from 11 metres to 9 metres as described in 622. Woolner Avenue, Cosham, parking in Woolner Avenue at its junction with Havant Road was causing congestion with vehicles not being able to pull into Walmer Road. The proposal was to extend the existing 4 metres of double yellow line on both sides of the junction. However, in view of concerns about loss of parking, we're proposing only doing it on the east side, which is the side that people turn off the main road into. Madara Road in Cosham, access to Orford Court's 15 parking spaces. The proposal was to protect that by 11 metres of double yellow line. Again, we got objections to the loss of parking. We believe it's important to have safe access, and also if vehicles aren't able to access those 15 spaces, they're likely to take up more on-street parking. So our recommendation is to implement as advertised. In Perone Road and Baypone Road in Hilsea, there was concern about parking on the bend near the junction. Again, we've got objections to the loss of parking, highlighted in paragraph 661, but we recommend implementing the 30 metres of double yellow lines as proposed in order to promote safety around that junction. Kingsley Road, in view of the objections, the proposed 5 metres of double yellow lines westward from its junction with Ironbridge Road, we're recommending that that's reduced to 2 metres, and the remaining yellow lines in that proposal are implemented as proposed. And finally, in Shelley Avenue, Paulsgrove, the proposal was to restrict parking on the south side of Shelley Road, so that you only allow parking on the north. The idea was to increase the amount of parking available because there's less driveways there. However, the representations have shown that that would cause considerable difficulties to people who have disabled bays, which are currently on the south, and it would mean moving them to the north. And the people concerned are saying that would cause them considerable difficulties, so the recommendation is not to make that change. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Councillor Bosher.
Not a lot to say on this, to be quite honest, Councillor Stagg. I mean,
Chair.
I've always been
Chair,
one of
sorry to
those when it
interrupt.
comes to...
Sorry, I'm
Sorry.
very rude. I'm interrupt. Sorry. There are some deputations to be read out. Do you want to do that
I'm
before
sorry.
the debate?
Yes, I'd forgotten.
right, yes.
It's just so you can consider them before.
Yeah.
You have seen them, but it's to be read out.
My apologies.
Thank you. Okay, so we have 5 written deputations, so please bear with me. First is from Miss S. I've already made my complaint about the proposed parking changes to our road through Councillor George Madwick. I'm therefore reiterating what I stated to him and through to your department. We've been told that my disabled bay will be moved to the other side of our road due to the proposed new parking arrangements being discussed for Shelley Avenue, PO6 4pm. Opposite my home are 3 dropped curb driveways at this time, 16, 18 and 20, and a 4th driveway is being set up at number 14. Therefore, my disabled bay would not only be on the opposite side of my home, but also hundreds of yards further down the road. I only just managed to use my bay where it is now, right outside my home. This move would mean that my freedom would be fully restricted, as I would then be unable to go out. I cannot make it to our car if it's not right outside my home. I simply cannot. I already have an OT involved in my healthcare as well as a pain clinic consultant and an orthopaedic surgeon, as my mobility and other health issues are very bad, extremely bad. Apart from severe crumbling of all the joints throughout my entire body due to very severe arthritis, I have also had 15 operations with my orthopaedic surgeon to my right foot and leg after an accident. Very serious operations that only just prevented my having my foot removed above the ankle. This has resulted in approximately 20 different pieces of metalwork being bolted and screwed into my foot and up into my leg, including one long bar through the sole of my foot and up into my knee and screwed to my leg bones. And still my leg is virtually useless, after all, and has so much pain in it on a daily basis that sometimes I can barely function. I use crutches and a wheeled walker at all times and only just manage, but this gives me my only little bit of independence now. As well, I have 2 extremely bad knee joints and my hips are also nearing the time for replacement surgery. I suffer in every joint from my head to my toes. One of my many other medical issues is urge incontinence, which means if I need the toilet, I need it right away. If this happens outside our home by my front gate, then it is difficult enough to get inside quickly enough to get to the toilet, or at least in my home behind closed doors. If my disabled bay was across the other side of the road and hundreds of yards down, as because of the 4 driveways opposite my home it would be, then I would wet myself in the middle of the street and be too ashamed to go outside again. I never go out without my husband in the car, as I cannot manage alone, so you would take away the only little time I can go outside of my house, when he is home to take me out in our car. Before anyone has the bright idea to say my husband could push me in a wheelchair across the road to our car, then please disabuse them of this idea. I weigh far too much due to my inability to walk far for my husband to push me anywhere in a wheelchair. Plus, the little bit of walking I can do is very important psychologically to my mental health. The only other solution to the problem would be a dropped curb designated parking bay on the front garden of our property. We cannot afford to have this work done ourselves, but would welcome the council doing this work for us and paying for it to be done. To move my disabled bay from directly outside of my home is totally against my disabled inclusion rights. Please do not move my disabled bay from outside my home. I am totally distraught about all of this. If you do push this move through, you might as well sign my death certificate. Okay. Number 2 is Mr. and Mrs. S. We write in support of the above, which is being considered on the 2nd of September. Our main reasons for doing so are the ongoing, and in some cases worsening, issues of inconsiderate, illegal pavement parking, including by commercial vehicles such as vans. We hope our views will be given due attention. Number 3 is Mr. M. I think something needs to be done about the parking on Shelley Avenue. The double yellow proposal should be reconsidered. Surely if some of the grass verge can be paved just a small amount on the north side, then the disabled bays can be moved to that side. Number 4, Mr. S. Parking along Shelley Avenue has been a major problem in the last few years. On the south side, over half of the houses currently have a driveway, and more are obtaining one too to ensure parking. This leaves only 10 to 15 available spaces, and this will continue to decrease as more south side drives are approved. Most houses also have multiple vehicles too. Due to limited spaces in the area, vehicles park on the grass banks on the north side, resulting in wet conditions being slippery. Myself and my children have nearly slipped in the mud during bad weather months. This is dangerous for children and the elderly. Vehicles also park across people's drives because there is nowhere else to park, and this results in anxiety and unnecessary worry about not knowing if you can get into your drive after a long day at work, etc. The majority of the north side have been declined a driveway due to the gradient being too high, not as high as some of the roads in the surrounding areas. Driveway options for the north side need to be reviewed again, and wooden bollards need to be placed along the grass verges to hinder any injuries from occurring and to stop vehicles parking on the grass verges. I personally think the road would be greatly improved if parking is moved across to the north side and the 2 disabled bays could be moved to the north side or given off-road access for them to have driveway access outside their houses. In the nearby roads, the disabled bays have been relocated on the opposite side of the road with no problems, and if they prefer not to park on the grass verges side, they can enter the road to enable drivers parking on the roadside. Something needs to change to the parking along Shelley Avenue, and there are many options available to do this. Currently, if a resident doesn't have a driveway and arrives home after a certain time, 6 p.m, it's likely we have to park 3 or 4 roads away. For the elderly and the young especially, this is dangerous in the dark. Myself and many other residents feel like the road needs improving because currently it's dangerous and inappropriate. We also feel the north side has limited options and this is unfair. And the last one is from Councillor Darren Sanders. I'm sorry I cannot be at the meeting today. However, I wish to support the recommendation not to change the double yellow lines in Hayling Avenue. As the report indicates, passing remains difficult along this stretch of Hayling Avenue, so needs passing places. This is the only place in that stretch where that can happen, so retaining the yellow lines is sensible. Residents were concerned when people turned up to get rid of them before and angry when this was initially proposed. I am delighted that this is now not recommended and hope the decision is confirmed.
Thank you, Jane. Councillor Bosher.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Stagg. As I was saying, I mean, from my time being a cabinet member, I always felt that when it comes to road safety and double yellow lines, it's those people that live there that are one's best placed to actually make those decisions. I've got a sort of a question and a comment. The question firstly is around the deputation that I read earlier on and Jane repeated, which is about the disabled lady in Shelley Avenue, I think it was, wasn't it? Whether her issues had actually been accommodated in the tweaks in the first instance, and secondly, I shouldn't really have to declare an interest, I guess, but there are 4 there, albeit one junction that I've been arguing for, and I'm pleased to see the Tregarron Avenue Dysart junction that has been the subject of 5 or 6 pretty serious accidents over the last 18 months, including one young lady who was a pedestrian and had life-changing injuries as a result of it, is finally actually going to be happening. I personally would have been happier if it had happened a year ago, but we are where we are, and hopefully we can move this forward and make that junction an awful lot better. But perhaps you could just address the question around the disabled lady in her parking bay, which would be useful.
So the recommendation for Shelley Avenue is that we don't implement the proposal, so that means we're not moving any disabled bays or parking to the north side. So that lady will retain her disabled bay outside her house.
Yes, and I think the situation is different, isn't it, from the other... There are other roads around there where we have changed things, but this is very different, isn't it?
Yeah, we started off with Chaucer Avenue a few years ago, you probably remember, and it made sense to move the parking from the south to the north side. There's more parking available, and then we did the same with Dryden Avenue, and then residents, obviously seeing that, thought they would like to see the same thing in Shelley Avenue, but it's turned out that it would really disadvantage more people than it would benefit.
Yes, totally agree. Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Bosher? Councillor Heaney.
Thank you. I don't have a lot of comments to make really on this because these are very particular local issues, and I'm sure the ward councillors have had an opportunity to have their say, and if they're fine with it or they haven't objected, then I'm sure that's okay. I mean, I do know a couple of the areas here, Orford Court, because being a former custom councillor, that was an issue, and I think that's probably a sensible proposal. Similarly with Warner as well, I know there was issues around there. So I've got no other sort of queries or comments on it, so I think they're reasonably sensible proposals, I think so.
And you know the Hayling Avenue situation because you actually live there.
Well, it's a bit further down the road from me,
yes,
so I didn't get a letter, but I'm aware of it, and also I do know that, we do need, I mean, Darren's completely
but
right.
Also, I'm hoping that the bus service will eventually come back there, so, because that stretch there
yes, because
there was a bus stop, so, yes.
Yeah. I did have one question from a resident today who said that, I don't know, this is a bit off mark, but Neville Road has had 20 mile per hour markings put in the road, but Hayling Avenue doesn't. Given it's the longer road where people speed, they said, would there be any possibility of putting 20 mile per hour markings on Hayling Avenue? I don't know.
Isn't Hayling Avenue
it's a 20 mile per hour road, but it is used as a route.
Isn't it a main distributor road, or is it...
Tangier Road is, but not Hayling supposed to be, although ambulances do occasionally use it.
And they totally ignored
it was just a question that a resident asked me actually today, because I was chatting to them and I said I was coming to a meeting.
I think Hayling Avenue is one of those roads, one of many in the city that needs traffic calming measures, but that's a different issue.
That's a different issue, okay, right. Okay,
I'm happy with all of these. Nikki, sorry.
Sorry. You mentioned the junctions in Cosham, Julia, and just to let you know the rest of this, Freighton and Farlington, you mentioned those double lines. Obviously, we didn't receive any objections, so the work for that has been ordered, and it should actually be starting this week. So,
is that the one outside the nursery?
That's the nursery.
Yeah, quite, yes, yeah.
So we got the signage put in, but I did ask that we could extend the double yellow lines because I've got more video clips from ringing doorbells with cars zipping past when you hear this God Almighty smash and God knows what, and you can see the vehicles, particularly in Dysart, that are parked right up to the junction, and it is a safety issue. It's exactly.
Yeah, good. Okay, so I approve all of those recommendations, Jane. Thank you, everybody. The end of another exciting TNT decision meeting.